Okay, we've just hit 67 people attending, people participating in this webinar. So 70, better still. So I'm going to start without further ado. I think 70 is round about the number of MPs we have got supporting the early day motion in the House of Commons now to stop the eviction of the Sumerian family and stop the JNF's charitable status. So partly in answer to that first question, we've already seen pressure on MPs to get them to sign up to that early day motion in this country would certainly be welcome. But of course, there are campaigns against the JNF across the world. I'm going to start by introducing myself and the topic, and then I'm going to be engaging our other two panelists in the discussion. My name is John Nicholson. I'm a Palestine activist in Manchester. And today's webinar is on the relationship of the Jewish National Fund, or KKL, as it's known in Israel, and the Israeli military. And I'm delighted to be joined by Shir Hever and Greg Dropkin, long-term activists and researchers. Very simply speaking, the Jewish National Fund is a racist organisation. It aims to build Jewish homes for Jewish people, but only by stealing the homes and lands of the Palestinians. The Stop JNF is a campaign to stop the JNF altogether in its tracks, but particularly to remove the charitable status that it manages to have in a number of countries around the world. And today's webinar is the fourth in a series, and I would encourage everyone who hasn't seen the previous ones to look them up and have a look at the others that we've held so far. I make clear today's is not a Palestinian viewpoint, and nor is it a legal session on charity status here or elsewhere, but it is very careful research into how the JNF is integral to the Israeli state, defense, security, military, different words that are used, and especially in the Naqab or Negev desert. This hopefully gives us more possible arguments as to why such links should automatically debar the JNF from being a charity. A couple of little bits of housekeeping. Please do use the chat box for information. Not too many unrelated announcements if possible, please. And we will be putting some hopefully helpful information in this. And as I've said, questions preferably after about 4:45 we'll be looking at in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, do put them in there. For me, there are three main points for this afternoon. The first is that Israel always has had plans for the Naqab. And secondly, that these are strategic because they involve both military and population, and that includes racist considerations. And thirdly, quite simply, that the JNF is integral to this, dressing up racism and apartheid as educational and environmental. And I'm just going to give 3 or 4 examples of the history of this collaboration between the JNF and the Israeli military. The first is something that Ilan Pappé set out in his book on ethnic cleansing, and he was one of the first contributors we had to our webinars. Firstly, the JNF was in the Israeli investigation of land that they were looking to seize even before the Naqba. Weitz, the head of the settlement department in the JNF, was co-opted into the Israeli political decision-making process. And his well-known quote now is that the only solution is to transfer the Arabs from here to neighboring countries. Not a single village or a single tribe must be let off. And he added, for this, funds will be found. He directed operations in the early 1948 period, even before the Naqba. He made clear how tractors were essential to dispossession and depopulation. All we need is 400 tractors to prevent anyone returning to their lands. And he said, we have begun the operation of cleansing, removing the rubble, preparing the villages for cultivation and settlement. Some of these will become parks. Forestation then prevented the Palestinians returning, and it was the wrong trees, European-style pines quickly growing, water draining, which kept the original inhabitants from going back. Secondly, it's important to note how the JNF acquired land. It swapped land with the Israeli Land Agency. It got loads of the desert. Ilan Pappé again has described how the land captured in war was given to the custodian of absentee property then sold to the JNF at cut price. Thousands of Bedouin villagers were displaced, many into poverty and destitution in urban settings away from their homes. And that's the context for the photo that we saw as we were coming in. Thirdly, the roads. In 1967, JNF roads were constructed in the run-up to the war. They enabled the ground forces to move with speed. JNF road building was particularly praised by the Chief of Staff, Rabin, who said relations are very close. The funds work in building frontier roads, establishing outposts, developing the border regions have greatly contributed to bolstering our defences in frontier areas. It will continue to do so, which he was quite right about. And then fourthly, as in the title for this webinar, there have been long-standing plans for ethnic cleansing and massive Israeli Jewish settlement in the Negev desert, such as in the Prawer Plan, which again involved both the JNF and the military. Essentially, the Bedouins are to be blamed for invading, trespassing on their own land, and even more recently, they're accused of supplying drugs to the IDF in their bases. The Prawer Plan between 2012 and 2013 was accompanied by Blueprint Negev of an even earlier date, and essentially Israel depopulates the Bedouin and the JNF develops the Jewish settlements. The Prawer Plan itself was initially approved but then put on hold. There was some opposition even from the further right because they thought it was too generous to the Bedouins simply to relocate them, as that amounted to compensation for their illegal occupation of the land. You couldn't make all this up. Doron Almog, who headed the implementation team of the Prawer report, is the general who was head of the Southern Command in Gaza in 2002. This was followed by Prawer 2, as Adala, the human rights organization, calls it, in 2016 to 18, much the same as the original Prawer, aiming to dispossess and forcibly displace about 80 to 90,000 Palestinian Arab Bedouin citizens of Israel to segregated, concentrated areas in the northern Naqab, based on the false information that suggests, one, the Bedouin community is trespassing on state land and their presence is illegal, and two, that they've no legal claim to their ancestral land, despite all the documents they've got. A quote I saw recently from an environmental justice agency said, the Naqab Arabs share the desert with Israel's nuclear reactors, 22 agro and petrochemical factories, an oil terminal, closed military zones, several quarries, a toxic waste incinerator, cell towers, a power plant, several airports, a prison and 2 rivers of open sewage. Despite these numerous hazards, it is the Naqab Arabs themselves that some Israeli environmentalists see as a central environmental danger in themselves. And we have another webinar coming up on the environment in the JNF, which will be well worth attending in another month. I'll finish my opening remarks for this with a more current quote from Lieberman, who says, this isn't a social problem or a housing crisis, but a battle for the land. We are fighting for the national lands of the Jewish people, and some are intentionally trying to steal them and forcibly take them over. We cannot close our eyes and escape this reality. So that is the setting for this afternoon, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Shir Hever, who's a board member of the Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in Germany. His 2 books, excellent books, are The Political Economy of Israel's Occupation and The Privatization of Israeli Security. He works as an independent journalist and scholar. So, Shir, in order to bring it up to date a little bit, why is the Israeli military interested in massive settlement plans for the Negev?
Right. Thank you for this introduction. I don't want to repeat things that have already been said in the previous webinars. So I really want to focus about the global historical change of the shift between the more valuable and less valuable lands, where you have the Mediterranean coast, the area of the city of Tel Aviv and the surrounding towns and cities, which is the real estate with the very highest value all over Palestine. And in that area, the Israeli security elite, the people who have established the Israeli military and the Israeli prison system and secret police and Mossad and so on, have decided to establish all of their offices and training bases and so on in that area, because they wanted to be in the prime point of real estate for the whole country. The JNF facilitated that by taking ownership of these particular lands. So you have to understand, these are the generals, the top brass of the Israeli military, who want to be able to send their children to the best schools, to have their spouses have the best jobs, or to be close to the university and so on. And I think this is something that is not particular just to the case of Israel. There's a famous episode of the show Yes Minister from Britain about how the Ministry of Finance says it would be a good idea to move all the military bases far north where the land is cheaper, and that will free up very valuable real estate for commercial purposes. And of course, the generals are not too happy about this. And we see a very similar case happening in Israel, but what has happened starting from the 1990s especially, is that these generals have lost a lot of their political and social clout in society. And the new elite group, the economic elite, people who can own the biggest companies, corporations, they had been able to successfully put more and more pressure on the security elite through newspapers, through the political system, to say, this is costing way too much, this is holding the Israeli economy back. We need to take all of these military bases, the big centers of the secret police and the Mossad, and just push them to cheaper land, far to the south, where they will free up all of this very high-value real estate. Now, Netanyahu, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, we often think of him as a very militaristic and right-wing leader, but he has never been a friend to that security elite. In many ways, he has come into power by striking deals with the economic elite, which he later left behind, and now he's the supreme leader of a new elite group, which I call the populist right. But through that economic elite, he promoted in 2009 a massive land reform. And the land reform was to allow people to buy and sell land on the free market, which was not allowed in Israel until that point, because of the worry that allowing the land to be traded like a commodity might allow Palestinians to purchase their land again. And this reform of 2009 was really hinged on the JNF. The JNF played a major role in allowing those lands to shift hands. And by moving the bases to the south, where land is cheap, even to the chagrin of those generals, the most valuable lands under Israeli control become available for economic development. In 2011, 2012, there were massive social protests in Tel Aviv by young Israelis who said, because of the high cost of those lands, we can't do anything. We can't buy, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. We can't afford to have apartments anywhere near where we can find a job or go to university. And so that was the core of that social protest. And by giving the chance for some social mobility, or at least the possibility for some members of the middle class to retain the standard of living of their parents, Netanyahu wants to make sure that Netanyahu hopes to create this picture as if the economic situation is still under control, and moving these military bases to the south is a very big part of this strategy.
Remember to unmute myself. Thank you very much for that answer, Shir. I'm now going to just bring in Greg. Greg, who's a great personal friend, is a researcher in Liverpool, England, a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. He was active in the anti-apartheid movement and the Namibia Support Committee during the 1980s, and constantly makes appropriate comparisons with that anti-apartheid struggle as well. Greg, just as an initial question to follow up Shir's comments then, how is the JNF UK involved with the Israeli military?
Well, thanks, John, and hello, everybody. Well, there's one answer to the question is not at all. That's according to them. The JNF UK Finance Director, Simon Myers, recently wrote to Paul Kellerman of the Stop the JNF campaign, stating, quote, "All funding was for philanthropic projects and none had a military connection. For these reasons, JNF Charitable Trust was not in breach of the codes referred to," unquote. This interesting statement is false, but it acknowledges that funding with a military connection would breach charity law. The JNF UK funds projects to mentor students during their preparation for army service, and in some cases during and after it. There are 56 of these mechinot, if I'm now pronouncing it right, and JNF UK has funded at least 6, including the pre-military Torah Academy Nave Otzem in the western Negev Naqab. So I'd like to look at their brochure, Jimmy. Thank you so much. So this is the pre-military yeshiva, Otzem, with a helicopter and kids in the desert. And then up here, you can see, if you seek a uniquely Israeli experience, then Otzem is the place for you. And just below that slogan, there are 2 of the students in the yeshiva with their machine guns. So that's the deal there. That's it, Jimmy. If we can go back to the image to me, thanks. So where am I? I've got to just find what I'm trying to say.
You're looking down the barrel of a machine gun.
I've got it. Yeah. Okay. So Otzem. It was originally founded by Rabbi Rafi Peretz in Gush Katif, Gaza, and when Israel withdrew its Gaza settlements in 2005, Gush Katif settlers considered themselves uprooted and moved to the Negev Naqab as pioneers. Peretz became chief rabbi of the armed services from 2010 to 2016, which of course covers the period of the big war on Gaza in 2014, which we're all familiar with. Last year, he became leader of the religious nationalist Jewish Home Party and a member of the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, and he's now Minister of Jerusalem, Heritage, and National Projects in Netanyahu's government. In July 2019, he was Minister of Education, and he compared intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews to a second Holocaust. He endorsed gay conversion therapy, claiming to have given it, and supported annexation of the West Bank with votes for Jews only. Now, spreadsheets and brochures from the KKL JNF, that's the Israeli JNF, show that the JNF UK donated in 2015, 16, and 17, funding a venue for the Nave Otzem pre-army program. Earlier, JNF UK had funded a boys' dormitory for this all-male yeshiva. Ein Prat is another JNF UK funded mechina. Their webpage, entitled Sponsor a Lone Soldier, explains what is a pre-army program. A pre-army program is an opportunity for high school graduates to grow, learn, and develop leadership skills that will prepare them for the Army and for life after the Army. What are the benefits? The mechinot benefit both the people who graduate from them and the Army. I can't stress that enough. They're saying explicitly that the Army benefits from this program. Anyway, back to their blurb. Over 35% of our graduates gain officers' positions in the IDF. Who receives the sponsorship? North American youth who volunteer for the Israel Defense Force and would like to spend a year developing themselves in order to maximize their contribution are eligible for the sponsorship. So where am I? Yes, but what are lone soldiers? The Benji Hillman Foundation, also funded by JNF UK, explains lone soldiers may be young men and women from abroad who've chosen to leave everything behind and come to Israel on their own to enlist in the IDF, or Israeli-born young people who are from disadvantaged backgrounds or estranged from their families. The Benji Hillman Foundation provides lone combat soldiers with a permanent and caring home for the duration of their service. There are currently some 1,000 lone combat soldiers serving in the IDF. Derek Eretz received £464,000 from JNF UK in 2016, 17, and 18. They organize events that specifically assist our graduates at crucial times in their active duty, including right after basic training, at the point when they decide if to go into command positions, and more. High school students from the lower strata of society have a harder time qualifying for popular elite Army units. Graduates of the program are motivated and well-equipped to excel in the military. But according to the JNF UK Finance Director, Derek Eretz, programs have no military content. Another funding strand hides a strategic relationship, and most of the rest of what we talk about will be about this. Kiryat Malachi is an underdeveloped area in the northern Negev Naqab. One JNF UK funded project due to go live on the 1st of September is a so-called House of Excellence. The JNF UK describes it as an amazing after-school center that provides Israeli teenagers with all the best support and latest technology, tuition in core academic subjects, but also training in career skills such as design and coding. Kiryat Malachi is the second of 10 houses of excellence being set up in the Galilee and Negev Naqab. The KKL JNF explains, quote, activities at KKL JNF houses are in cooperation with former IDF Unit 8200 soldiers. Unit 8200 also helps students cope with COVID-19. After missing 2 months of school, Israeli students will receive online help and support for their matriculation exams from graduates of IDF Intelligence Corps Unit 8200 in conjunction with KKL JNF. As KKL JNF World Chairman Daniel Attar explained, educational collaboration with Unit 8200 has been in place for over 3 years now. KKL JNF has decided to invest heavily in education in order to close the gaps in education, especially between Israel's northern and southern peripheral regions and the center of the country. Over to you.
Thanks, Greg. And I'm going to come on to Shir specifically about Unit 8200, but can you just answer one question came up in the chat box then, or quick Q&A box then rather, about the name of the founder of OTSEM. Could you just repeat that slowly for people who are interested in that?
Yes, his name is Rafi Peretz. The surname is P-E-R-E-T-Z, and his nickname is Rafi. It's Raphael.
So if people want to do some more exploration about this character, feel free to do so. Shir, if I can come on to you again, what is Unit 8200 then? Why are they specifically interested in youth?
Well, this unit is now the most famous unit of the Israeli military, and it's also one of the largest, which shows a lot about how the Israeli military has transformed over the years, because officially it's an intelligence unit. The reason for its strange name, 8200, is that this is their zip code, because they're such a secretive unit that nobody's allowed to know their name. So they're named by their zip code. But they're not so secretive when, in many ways, the Israelis are now looking at this unit as a job opportunity provider, especially for upper middle class recruits to the military coming from privileged parts of society, so Ashkenazi Jews, secular Jews who are well educated, who have wealthier parents and want to send their kids to the military, but a lot of young Israelis are not going to the military anymore. And those who really see that as a choice, they have the means to avoid military service, they understand how the system works, many of them say, well, I'm only going to the military if there's something in it for me. And that really shows the way that the Israeli society has shifted. And I think that's something that we always have to remember, that Israel is a settler colonial society, which means there is always this narrative of colonizing the land as part of the way that people make their own choices in life. And if serving in the military for the first and second generation of Israelis was about putting your life on the line for the collective, for the nation, winning this land for the Jewish people, the third and fourth generations see that differently. They already have a different standard of living, and they say, well, my parents and grandparents sacrificed everything so that I can have this land. Now it's up to me to enjoy it. Now it's up to me to reap those benefits. So that unit, 8200, is the unit of reaping that enjoyment. It is a unit where every graduate of that unit is almost guaranteed to have a job in high tech, especially in the security sector. Now, it's also very interesting what exactly this unit does, because I said it's an intelligence unit, but in fact, it's a different version of intelligence than what a lot of us have come to know about Israeli intelligence. And I think this way that intelligence has shifted also tells us a lot about the relation between colonizer and colonized, where again, you have the first and second generation of Israelis during those years that the security elite was firmly in power, that said, if we want to control this territory and this population, the Palestinian population, we have to understand them. We have to take the time to study the Arabic language, the Arabic culture, the Palestinian culture. We need to understand something about Islam and Christianity. And this is something that is known as human intelligence. But this unit, 8200, is a unit about SIGINT, signal intelligence. Many of the members of that unit don't speak any Arabic at all. They don't care anything about Palestinian culture, and they don't try to infiltrate it. They just try to surveil it. They have very high-tech mechanisms to track people, where they are, what are they writing on their phones, what are they saying on their Facebook accounts. But there's a big difference between that kind of surveillance and effective intelligence that really lets you understand how people think. And I think that also shows in many ways that this unit is not as effective in controlling and dividing the Palestinian society as other Israeli units. And one last thing maybe I should say about this unit is that this unit also serves as a major channel for the biggest Israeli arms company, Elbit Systems, to infiltrate the Israeli military and find recruits for the company inside the unit 8200. So Elbit Systems provides this unit with systems, technology, radars, that sort of thing that they're using as part of their SIGINT work. And in exchange, those workers in the company know that, those soldiers in the unit know that they could become workers in the company as soon as they graduate, and they have a guaranteed job offer.
Shir, thank you for that, and particularly just at the end, that link with Elbit, which is obviously very real for us campaigning in the UK, those who are still watching. So thank you. Greg, I'm going to take you on to another bit of this plan, and there's also mention of the Houses of Excellence as part of the JNF 2040 plan. What on earth are the Houses of Excellence?
Okay, well, I'm now, if I manage the technology, just give me a second here. No. I'm gonna try to share the screen here. Let's see, okay.
All right, just while you're doing that, Greg, Shir, I've had one question. The sound is fine for me, but maybe if you could speak a little nearer your microphone next time that you're contributing. But don't worry too much. Greg, how are you doing with your technology?
Here we go. This is the promo for the 2040 plan in Hebrew on the KKL site. And basically, we've obviously had to get it translated, and David Sheen helped us with that. What this is showing is how they plan to bring 1.5 million settlers into the Galilee and to the Negev primarily, using high tech as the attraction for people to come and live in these peripheral areas. So that's their promo, and I'm going to come out of that now if I can. Okay, I'm out, and now I'm back to my...
And that link has just gone in the chat box for anyone who's interested in looking up the plan. It's in the chat box there. Sorry, Greg.
Okay, so thank you. So this is a very ambitious plan, which is described as, quote, established with the aim of bringing about change in Israeli society, expanding the borders of the startup nation to the Galilee and the Negev, a technological ecosystem in the periphery that will bring about demographic and economic change and encourage the settlement of 1.5 million Israelis in the Galilee and the Negev, turning the periphery into the engine of Israel's growth for the next 2 decades. The ambitious, the role that the JNF envisages for itself is equally modest. The JNF will serve as an operative integrator that will lead the program and coordinate the activities of all the partner organizations, the Israeli government, the academy, the IDF, and the business sector in Israel and the world, thanks to its performance capabilities, resources, strategic vision, settlement experience, diaspora ties, and more. An article entitled High-Tech Education and 1.5 Million Settlers explains the strategy of attracting no less than 1.5 million new settlers by 2040, making Israel a more stable and demographically balanced country, economically and socially. That's their words, and now I'll just say demographically balanced is code for a Jewish majority. But back to them. The Galilee will turn into a global power for food tech, agri-tech, and biotech, An industrial park in the Central Galilee will contain advanced high-tech industries and a research and development center. In the Negev, high-tech and cyber centers will be established in cooperation with the IDF's technological units and the security industries. The JNF will also expand its support for pre-military academies, which foster excellence amongst youth and encourage social and civil engagement, unquote. Well, we heard about pre-military academies like OTSEM earlier. Writing in English last June, the KKL JNF World Chairman Daniel Attar waxed lyrical on the IDF connection. Quote, the Negev, in conjunction with the IDF's technology units, which are moving their bases to the south, will make it into a capital of cyber tech, security in the defense industry, and artificial intelligence. The most famous IDF technology unit is Unit 8200, now collaborating with the JNF through the Houses of Excellence. When the collaboration was launched in 2017, Attar proclaimed, quote, KKL JNF's proven abilities, together with the skills of Unit 8200, will help foster Israel's future generation in the fields of cyber, high-tech technology, and innovation. This is the true realization of Zionism today, unquote. This means the Houses of Excellence match the JNF plans to make the Negev a capital of the security and defense industry. These are the same plan. Another IDF technology unit, 9900, recruits soldiers diagnosed on the autism spectrum. The Army says these soldiers have remarkable visual and analytic capabilities and can detect even the smallest details undetectable to most people. Unit 9900 specializes in computerized vision as used in autonomous driving, satellite and high-altitude surveillance, image recognition, GPS, mapping, virtual reality. These are all of interest to the military, but also to Google, Uber, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and hundreds of Israeli companies working in machine or computer vision, navigation, and image recognition. So now, Jimmy, could you share the map, please? Okay, this is a map called the Opportunity Map for the 2040 plan. And on the left, you have all these symbols which show you where the opportunities are. And for each symbol, if you click on it, you get a blurb in Hebrew. So, sorry, I'm just trying to point. The lowest symbol there is in Yerucham, if I'm pronouncing it right. And on the right, it tells you about what's there. And so if we go back to me now, I'll explain that. And that, thank you. So the southernmost flag in the Negev is for JC Tech Dimona Yerucham, a technological innovation and initiative center. Dimona itself is famous for the Negev Nuclear Research Center, which developed Israel's secret nuclear weapons program. As the flag caption indicates, the Dimona Yerucham Center was established in collaboration with the CDI. That's the Center for Digital Innovation, which describes itself as a nonprofit research center to promote and develop digital medicine in partnership with Israeli entrepreneurs. But the CDI was launched by Ben Gurion University of the Negev in 2015 with the involvement of Sharon Sasportas. He's the former head of operations for the IDF planning department, and he was also commander of the artillery division using Skylark drones made by Elbit Systems. In Beersheba, the map shows another technology innovation and entrepreneurship center in collaboration with CDI. It also shows a house of excellence described as, quote, academic reinforcement and technology guidance for hundreds of high school students in collaboration with AMN, unquote. But AMN is the Hebrew acronym for Amman, the central overarching military intelligence body of the IDF, which oversees Unit 8200. Amman are also directly responsible for selecting Palestinian targets for assassination. Thanks.
Thank you. I've had a couple of questions in passing, which I think are probably referenced in your article on LabourNet, the link to which we put in the chat box. But these were questions about the link for the opportunity map, for example, and some of the quotes that were put out earlier. So I hope people can find those in your article on LabourNet. I've had a converse comment that while Shir was sitting too far back from the microphone, you were sitting too near the microphone. So like Goldilocks, is it? I'm somewhere in between, hopefully. which allows me to come back to you, Shir, if I may, and ask a couple of other points which are also coming up in the Q&A box. And this is to do with the link between the military and the high-tech industry. How are the military and high-tech industry involved with each other? How's this sector developing in the Naqab, Negev and the Galilee? And what are these interconnections, including, if you have them, with the JNF between the military and economic elites?
Yeah, well, let me focus specifically about the connection between the tech industry and the military or security industry, because I think Greg has covered the connections with JNF very well. You know, when we talk about the concept of Israel as a startup nation, this is, I think, a slogan that is very well known. It comes actually from a book that is called Startup Nation that was published in 2009 and covers the period of 2000 to 2008. That is supposedly the time in which the Israeli startup miracle, to use their word, has occurred. Actually, if these years, 2000 to 2008, cover a period between two crises. The crisis of the NASDAQ of 2000, in which the tech bubble burst, and then 2008, the big economic crisis of that year. And according to the various researches by the Israeli economic media, they've discovered that the Israeli high-tech sector on a whole has created, between these two moments of crisis over these 8 years, zero value added growth, zero. Meaning that so many companies went bankrupt, so much debt had to be forgiven and erased, that it actually just covered all of the profit that was made by that sector. And these bankruptcies have affected mostly and disproportionately those startup companies that are not military related or not security related, leaving almost only the security companies. So those security companies, which also call themselves homeland security companies or cyber companies, these are the companies that had a kind of niche or a kind of advantage over other countries that also have high-tech sectors. So that's where we really see the connection coming from. We see that there was a budding new sector in the Israeli economy, which was also fueled by immigration from the former Soviet Union, of people who had very high level of technical education and were very fitting for that sector. But then that sector collapsed, except for those security companies. One of the ways by which it works is that many of these companies are based on knowledge and technology that is produced inside the military. So even in the unit 8200, but not only in that unit, where soldiers develop a new tool, let's say some kind of algorithm that reads people's Facebook posts in order to try to determine in advance and predict if they are perhaps contemplating a terrorist attack. There is actually this kind of algorithm, and a company that was created by these soldiers take this algorithm and then they sell it as a product. But actually they produced that algorithm when they were soldiers of the military. But the Ministry of Defense of Israel makes no effort to retain intellectual property over that technology. And that's not an oversight. That is an intentional policy in order to draw intelligent and productive soldiers to those units in the first place. So that's how the military is subsidizing actually this sector in a very roundabout way. They're not giving them money, but they're allowing them to retain intellectual property that they produce when they are wearing the uniform. And this builds, and then these soldiers not only use the actual technology that they've developed, but they also use the prestige of the Israeli military by saying this has already been tested by the Israeli military on Palestinians, so buy the technology from us because we are the experts in the field and it's battle tested. And that's the very famous laboratory model. We have to understand, of course, the laboratory model that we're talking about. Many of you may have seen the movie, The Lab by Yotam Feldman, which I think is a very good movie, and a documentary and many other similar reports talking about this laboratory model. But we have to understand that if we're looking at this in context, where is this laboratory model going? It's going down. It's going down very much. Many of the companies are not able to convince their customers to buy Israeli security technology, even this high-tech technology like those algorithms for Facebook, because the customers are saying, you haven't succeeded in stopping Palestinian resistance. The Palestinians are still resisting. So why do we need this very expensive technology if it doesn't do anything? I mean, it makes Palestinians miserable, but it doesn't keep them under control. There is a famous case with this particular algorithm on Facebook in which a Palestinian from East Jerusalem was arrested in 2017 for allegedly writing on his Facebook page, attack them, when in fact he wrote good morning with a little typo. The algorithm just mistranslated that into attack them. He was arrested by Israeli police, and for 14 hours he was kept in the police department because there was not a single Israeli police officer capable of reading Arabic in order to read the post and see what the error was and let him go. And that shows that, you know, this is what it means to move from human to SIGINT, right? The Israeli police lost its ability to really control the Palestinian population. They're arresting the wrong people. The laboratory is not successful. What are the companies that are still relatively well-known and successful? Where there are basically three companies: Black Cube, NSO, and Candiru. And these are the so-called offensive cyber companies. I'll say that again: Black Cube, NSO, and Candiru. And these three companies are swallowing up the small failing companies in the same way that Elbit Systems is swallowing up a lot of failing military companies and growing as a company while the sector as a whole is actually not growing. So that's something that we need to remember. The Israeli arms exports are not increasing. It's just that some companies are getting fatter at the expense of all the middle and small companies. And these offensive cyber companies are very well known, and they get a lot of attention in the media because they have no scruples, because they go after very controversial targets. For example, NSO decided to target WhatsApp, which belongs to Facebook, and hack into WhatsApp. They've hacked 1,400 accounts. Now Facebook is suing them. Most companies, even if they have the technology to hack WhatsApp, won't try to go against Facebook because Facebook is such a powerful international corporation. In the same way, Black Cube have agreed to take on contracts from Harvey Weinstein to go after the women who complained against his sexual harassment and rape cases. Most companies, even if they have the ability to help somebody like Harvey Weinstein, they would just say no because they don't want this bad press. But the Israeli companies are doing that mainly because they're desperate, because they don't get enough customers. So they're willing to work with really the bottom of the barrel, and those customers that like Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who has also allegedly used NSO as in order to survey on the communications of Jamal Khashoggi, leading to his murder in 2018. These are really horrible stories, and they show exactly what happens when the security sector, which is for profit, gets connected to the high-tech sector, which is for profit. But you take a policy that is developed by the Israeli military to control the Palestinian population, and then you try to sell it. You're actually selling a product intended to surveil, to control, to torture, to incarcerate, and to deny people their human rights and the right to express themselves. Of course, it's going to be sold to the most shady clients around the world, and that gives those companies a very bad name. It actually gives the Israeli brand in itself a very, very bad name, and gives a shot in the arm to the boycott movement, to the BDS movement.
Shir, thank you. Whoa, hang on. Thank you very much for that. And I think I'll just ask Greg one final question about the houses of excellence. How do they relate to what Shir's just been telling us about? Greg, can you just unmute yourself? Well, great.
Very good. I'm unmuted now.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Too close. Just sit back slightly.
It's not that. It's where I've got the microphone. I'll talk softer. Thanks. I just wanted to throw in that NSO was actually set up by veterans of 8200, so there's a direct connection there. But now if I can find my information. Okay, Shir has explained how the IDF and the private sector reinforce and feed off each other. And whilst the JNF presents the Houses of Excellence as a strategy to develop peripheral regions and assist underprivileged youth, both the military and the companies benefit from the initiative. An earlier scheme called the Mag Shamim program involved the private philanthropic Rashi Foundation and was eventually adopted by the Israeli government in 2013. The foundation explains, quote, in view of the growing need for cyber specialists, the Mag Shamim program was initiated in the belief that nurturing the talents of youth in the periphery will expand the pool of candidates to serve in the IDF's elite technological units, particularly in the intelligence corps, and eventually lead to the high-tech industry in Israel. Well, Unit 8200 is composed primarily of 18 to 21-year-olds. In 2015, the Financial Times explained how the unit relied on the recruitment of young Israelis through Mag Shamim, the 3-year after-school program. A 3-year after-school program for 16 to 18-year-old students with exceptional computer coding and hacking skills. One student told the FT his hacking tool was made to appear like a keyboard so you can infiltrate any company in the world. As the Houses of Excellence appear to be a similar program, Unit 8200 also stands to recruit selected students they have tutored in the houses. The houses also introduce students to the fast-moving world of high-tech startups. The first house in Nof HaGalil, formerly Upper Nazareth, is described by the JNF as, quote, a hub that equips youths in Israel's outlying communities with the tools to take part and excel in Startup Nation. Activities include hackathons with Unit 8200 and visits to leading local and international high-tech companies. The House carries out projects with the Unit 8200 Alumni Association's TechLift and Cooperation Program. TechLift's founder, Sharon Fisher, established Unit 8200's Cybersecurity Program and later became Managing Director of the 8200 EISP Accelerator Program, the first startup accelerator in Israel, which has supported more than 130 startups. The Entrepreneurship Innovation Support Program, EISP, enables startup entrepreneurs to use the network of contacts, human capital, and knowledge of Unit 8200 graduates in Israel and abroad to turn their venture into a profitable and influential company. Well, it's easy to imagine how seductive the world of elite intelligence units and profitable high-tech startups might appear to teenagers wondering if they'll ever get a job. But in reality, this is a recruitment drive for military units which bend the computer skills and imagination of youth into tools for war crimes. And that's not charity.
I think you've taken my punchline there, haven't you? It's certainly not charity. And I'd like to thank both our panelists tremendously for the huge amount of information that you've given there in a very short space of time, and also for being so willing to share the links and give further details as we've gone along. I don't think I can remember a webinar where quite so much has been going on at the same time and people spelling out names and giving connections. Now, we have got time for question and answers here. I've been having a look in the Q&A box, and I dare say Shir and Greg will have time to do a little bit of that now. And we've had quite a few questions about connections and quite a few questions about opposition as well. And I think I'd like to start, if I can group a couple together. I happen to know both Pia and Jenny who've asked these questions, but the first one is, are there any connections between JNF UK and Elbit or other Israeli spy companies operating in UK, or indeed the Israeli-UK trade in spying equipment and systems? So that's about connections, JNF, Elbit or spy companies. And the other one, which is aimed at Shir, but is if you can say anything about the extent to which the Naqab may be significant as a location for helping Israel bring ashore gas from the Gaza gas field. So if I could take those two first. I don't know, Greg, do you want to say anything briefly on either of those, and then I'll bring Shir in specifically.
I'm not aware of a direct connection between JNF UK and Elbit, but as you've heard, Elbit comes into this story in several ways. Shir talked about one of them. Another is that actually another 8,200 graduate set up the cybersecurity system in Elbit, and that's in the LaborNet article. And I've mentioned the fact that Sharon Sisportas, who was one of the founders of the CDI, which figures extensively in the opportunities for the Negev, himself was the commander of the artillery division, which was using the Elbit drones, the handheld, hand-launched Skylark drones. So anyway, there are those connections, but I don't know of something where you can say, okay, here's JNF UK money going directly to Elbit. I don't know of that. I don't rule it out, but I don't know.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I'll bring you in, Shir, now, and also if you can happen to add to this any further sources that people could go towards to find out some of the information. That's another question that's just come up a second ago as we were speaking. But over to you, Shir.
Okay, actually, regarding sources, I think maybe a webinar is not the best forum to transfer that, because we want a long list of links and different sources on different aspects and angles. And of course, we have sources in different languages as well. Unfortunately, some of the best analysis only exist in Hebrew. I find that the companies themselves tend to be the best source on what they're doing. Elbit Systems is writing to their own stockholders or potential stockholders by boasting on how they make new sales and develop new products, and that's something that we can always use. But to the question about the natural gas, I think here it's very important to understand that the issue about the gas is not about the actual commodity, but it's about the scarcity and the price. So in the year 2000, Palestinians discovered natural gas offshore of Gaza. It's called the Gaza Marine. Until today, 20 years later, they've not been allowed to develop that resource. In 2009, in February, the Israeli companies, in cooperation with the US companies, discovered natural gas offshore of Israel, offshore of Haifa. It was later detected that they have actually slanted their drills in such a way that they're also siphoning some of the gas from Gaza Marine into their own gas drills and are actually plundering the Palestinian natural resource there. But that is not where the big theft is. In fact, all of the natural gas that is stolen from Palestinians directly as a commodity, in terms of money, is not where the big money is. The big money is in the fact that the Israelis were allowed to develop their gas almost instantly and immediately started to line up customers for the gas and sign long-term contracts with customers in Egypt, in Jordan, in Cyprus, and beyond. When the time comes that Palestinians will finally be allowed to commercialize their own natural gas offshore of Gaza, there are not going to be any customers left. And it doesn't matter how much gas they have left if there are nobody who wants to buy it, and they have to use all of it only for domestic use, for their own industry, and for that purpose they do have enough. So that's something important to understand. So in fact, the Naqab here doesn't play a major role, because it's actually the Israeli Navy that is playing a major role in preventing Palestinians from establishing any rigs for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that, both. Sorry, Greg, did you want to come back on that too?
Not about the gas field, but I did want to say that. Sorry to plug my own article, but if you read the LaborNet article, you have links which give the sources for everything that I've said today, and I think possibly bear on some of what Shir said as well. Not to undermine the points that Shir has just made about company sources in Hebrew, but a great deal of the story that we've been telling this afternoon is linked from my article, so please read it. I won't say that again. I won't say that again.
I should say, I mean, to an extent, we've all three been involved in this article, and certainly in many discussions arising from the links between Israeli security training and indeed security training elsewhere in the world, just as a byproduct of this. But I think I'd like to come on in the questions to a couple that are about opposition, if I may. One of these is asking specifically, I think, to Shir, but if the Israeli youth are now less patriotic to the Israeli state and want what is best for themselves, does this extend to Zionist youth not living in Israel? And if so, maybe will people be continuing to be willing to become settlers or not? Another question I will link with this, although it's from Agnes, who's admitted she's sent 3 questions in one, but are there significant oppositions to the settlements in Israel? Are you, Shir, under attack, threat by the Israeli government? A very personal question, up to you if you want to say anything. And is there any hope while Americans and Israelis keep voting in Trump and Netanyahu? And Agnes does kindly apologise for asking 3 questions, just small questions there, Agnes, but in one go. So if perhaps I'll start with you, Shir, but the question about whether the youth are going to want to continue to be willing to be settlers, and then the wider questions as well that Agnes has been asking. Would you like to say what you think about those?
Yeah, well, the thing is that the way that the population of the settlements, or the colonies as I prefer to call them,
Yes,
grows is by attracting a very strong ideological group of people who are willing to live in very difficult conditions in the beginning and establish a kind of seed for a new colony, where later, when the military comes to protect them and evacuates all Palestinians from that area, and the infrastructure is built for them, they move on to start a new seed, and the older seed is now being built with proper apartment buildings and becomes a whole town. And this process is how actually the colonies have started. But indeed, it really so the next wave of people coming into those colonies don't do that because of some kind of ideological fervor. They're coming for the cheap houses, and that population, of course, still exists in Israel because housing is very expensive. But that first group of hardliner and very dedicated young people, they often call themselves the youth hills. The hill youths. They are not such a big group at all, not a very large group of people at all, and in many ways they're not exactly Zionists, or at least their take on Zionism is far, far away from mainstream Zionism. And I think when the question took that direction to ask about Zionists outside of Israel as well, the whole Zionist movement is in deep decline. That doesn't mean that Israeli colonialism is in decline. That doesn't mean that racism is in decline. But Zionism as a kind of unifying call, as a kind of movement that people can even answer the question, what is Zionism, is really falling apart. In fact, the right-wing parties in Israel, the Likud party and the other members of the coalition, have stopped calling themselves Zionists about 10 years ago. And you don't hear them refer to themselves as Zionists. They sometimes refer to their enemies as anti-Zionists, but they only use Zionism in the negative sense. And when we're talking about Jewish communities around the world that used to be mostly pro-Israel, that is definitely falling apart. That is definitely falling apart. I mean, just this July, last month, there was this interview with Peter Beinart, who is often seen as the voice of U.S. Jewry. Of course, the U.S. Jewry is very diverse, and he's only representing some of them, but he does represent a very large group. And he said, I've given up on the Jewish state. There's not. He absolutely said that. He gave up on the Jewish state and said there has to be one democratic state for everybody, and regardless of whether there's going to be a Jewish majority or not. That's a very big shift. Yeah, so regarding the question of whether I am personally under attack, I really don't feel that I'm under attack. I think that my position is very privileged, and I can speak freely, and I can come and speak to you in this webinar without any problems. The way that the Israeli government tries to crack down on free speech outside of Israeli borders, because I live in Germany right now, so it makes it easier, of course, is by recruiting local organizations. And they have the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and that ministry is funding groups all over the world, but mainly in the UK, in Germany, and in the United States, these 3 countries most of all, to get them to attack pro-Palestinian or Palestinian solidarity groups. Now there's a new Minister of Strategic Affairs, and she is actually taking a different direction. And as part of taking a different direction, she allowed some of the documents, some of the protocols of how the ministry operated in the last 4 years to be revealed. Very fascinating documents showing, in fact, that this strategy of attacking activists and trying to demonize them, delegitimize them on a personal basis because they support BDS or because they support Palestinian rights has mainly failed miserably because the organizations that were the counterpart organizations in these states, in the UK, Germany, and the United States, 3 countries that are basically democratic countries with a liberal tradition, more or less, these organizations didn't want to be associated with some kind of secret police or some kind of international conspiracy, and they just refused to cooperate. So yeah, of course, there are some right-wing organizations that do act also against myself. I had many lectures canceled, for example, but that's nothing very serious. And so I am hopeful. And then to finish my answer about hope, I do think there's a lot of hope, because I think that the more we analyze what's happening in Israel, we see stagnation, collapse, a rotting system, where people are protesting very, very angrily against the government for failing them in every way. And more, these protests are moving towards the moment in which Israelis, they're not becoming leftists, they're not becoming pro-Palestinian, but they are no longer willing to exclude Palestinians from that protest in the name of loyalty to the nation and that sort of thing. At some point, they're saying, if one of the speakers at this demonstration is going to be Ayman Odeh, the chairman of the Joint List, usually he would be just not allowed to come up to the stage. And now people are cheering him because they agree with what he says, regardless of the fact that he's Palestinian. And that is indeed very hopeful. I think that what we really need to see happening now is also the Palestinians, which are under direct military occupation in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, uniting and overcoming the divisions between different factions and rallying around a single strategy. As soon as that strategy is accepted as a consensus, it will happen. It will happen instantly. Israelis know that, of course. They're trying to keep the Palestinians divided because they know that's the last thing that allows a Jewish state to exist. And that's why I'm hopeful, because they cannot keep the Palestinians divided forever.
Shir, can I just ask one thing there? You mentioned some documents, and you may say the same to me that a webinar is not the best place to do this, but some of the documents you mentioned, are these published? Are they accessible? Are there places?
Yes, so Haaretz published those documents 2 days ago in Hebrew. Usually the English version either comes 2 days later or never. Because I mean, this is of great interest to international readers of Haaretz newspaper. So I could put in the chat the link to the Hebrew article at least, and then the English one I hope will be published soon.
Okay, thank you for that specific. Greg, did you want to add anything about opposition?
I agree really strongly with the stuff that Shir said at the very end, and a bit off topic for today, but I think this means that the question of one democratic state is coming onto the agenda, and that will really transform the whole nature of what we're involved in here. But anyway, the point I did want to make is that if you look at Daniel Attar's quote about the true meaning of Zionism today, it's very interesting. I think this does relate to what Shir is saying. He's saying that the true meaning of Zionism today is teaching young students how to be cyber tech, right? Nothing about, the history of 5,000 years oppression and now we've got our own country. Nothing about that at all. It's, let us teach you how to get into Unit 8200. That's the true meaning of Zionism today. I mean, in a way, that's quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. And Shir's just translated it into English as we were speaking there. I see it's in the chat box. Thank you very much. I've got a few more questions here that people have been asking, loosely related on topics still around the military. And if I just highlight these broadly speaking and ask you both if you've got any particular views, then please do. One I think we've partly covered was around links with either the military elite or the economic elite, particularly from the JNF. So that's, I mean, Greg, you may want to say a little more about that, whether that's JNF or JNF UK, Shir, either, but certainly those links with military elite or economic elite. Another one about the military, and this is, I think, very much, Shir, in line with what you've written about on the privatization of security as well, where you see other countries such as Egypt and Turkey, the development as an independent economic organization of a military, whether the military in Israel is thinking of developing a similar model. That's in addition to individual soldiers profiteering from developments, as you've said. Again, I think a question we've partly covered about the best sources for information on where or whom these Israeli high-tech cell that you've talked about, where this is giving Israel a bad name. I think if I digress myself a little bit on that one, when you were talking, you were saying Israel doesn't want to look like this. Of course, one of the anti-arms protesters made the point to me a year or two ago that when we see a horrific picture of an Israeli arm blowing somebody up and we think that's horrible, the arms companies think that's great, and that's part of their sales pitch at arms fairs in this country, for example. So maybe a little bit of an edge there about giving a bad name to Israel. There was a question about UK, Canadian, US defence contracts with Israeli entities and how far these involve the JNF. And I think that's going to be a bit more oblique, but it's a point. And obviously, the Canada stopped the JNF. There's a great deal of information on their website. I think we've highlighted in the chat box. Excellent work. And I know Sue Goldstein, who's been corresponding on this call as well. I think there was I think there was another question somewhere down the bottom that seems to have disappeared from my list here, but maybe we've covered it. Yes, I know. This was directly to you, Shir, so I'll just throw it in for good measure. Whether you're of the view that Israel's promotion of itself as a highly successful tech nation is not entirely accurate, and whether BDS has any room to exploit that vulnerability, that there's a bit of a gap between the facade and the reality. Now, I've thrown about 100 lines of text at you both there. Greg, have you anything to give me back?
I don't think so. I think people were hoping
that was easy.
I think people were hoping that we were going to find some arms contract that had the JNF as a partner in the contract somehow, and I'm not aware of that. What I'm aware of is the stuff that I've talked about, and really that's the limit of what I know about. But if we're coming towards the end, I want to say something else, if I may, just to throw this into the strategic discussion. See, I think what's going on here is that there are things which are not at all shocking to a mainstream Israeli audience, which are quite shocking here. The idea that the army is a central institution in the country, that's not going to shock most Israelis. The idea that you should encourage youth to have their military service and to feel committed to going into the army, that's not a shock in Israeli society. Even the idea that you have to fight really dirty is not a shock in Israel, where they see the whole thing as fighting terrorism. We see it as war crimes, you know, and we're right and they're wrong, but to them, they're fighting terrorism. So of course you spy on anybody who might possibly be planning a terrorist massacre, even if you can't understand Arabic and you get it all wrong in that fascinating story that Shir was telling. But my point is, this is not a shock to a mainstream Israeli audience, I believe. But here, it's up against a completely different problem, because here, that narrative doesn't control everything. And here, the JNF has to operate as a charity. So the idea that as a charity, you're training people to go into the army, which is carrying out these things which we have to call war crimes, whether the ICC gets around to calling them war crimes or not, everybody who knows what happened in Gaza here in this country thinks that's outrageous. So it's a different audience, but the JNF is dependent on this international network of charities, including the JNF UK. And so to me, that's the contradiction, that maybe this doesn't seem that shocking to everybody in Israel, but it's really shocking here. And I didn't know any of the stuff that I've been talking about today, and I think that means that very few people in this country will know it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Shir.
How much time do I have? You've given me like 5 questions.
It's all right. We still have 89 participants, and I know they can't answer me back. And this is one of the difficulties for chairing. I'm used to chairing meetings where you kind of get a sense from the audience if they're willing to go on. I can't tell. So long as you're here and me and Greg are listening, I think please just go ahead.
Okay, but I'll try to get to the point quickly and just select a few of what you said. So first of all, talking about the JNF between the economic and the security elite, this is something that really touches the heart of my research. I'm very interested in that. And those who have listened to the previous webinars would know about Yosef Weitz and his correspondence with Ben-Gurion about how land is transferred between the military and the JNF in order to civilianize the land. That's, I think, a very interesting role of the JNF, of actually taking the militaristic part of the country and turning it into civilian, because Ben-Gurion wanted to have both. And he wanted to use the JNF as a tool. So Ben-Gurion was the head of the security elite, but the JNF is not a person. The JNF is an institution, which is used by people from the elites, from different elite groups, and they're pulling in the JNF in different directions. Over the years, the JNF has lost that role of being a counterweight to the Israeli military, and painting a picture as if land appropriation is about civilian development, or about and they try to do that a little bit by pretending to be an environmental organization. Say that they take, for example, military training zones and say that they're actually natural reserves, and in a way to legitimize them. But I think over the years, when the security elite became less and less dominant in the Israeli political system, the JNF has been more and more associated, but from the point of view of Israeli politicians, as just a treasure of wealth, of very valuable lands, and an income that can be plundered for their own political gains. So the economic elite, which has been calling for years to just dismantle the JNF, saying why should a public institution hold on to so much public wealth? Let's just privatize everything, let corporations sort it out. And the old Zionist guard telling them, well, be careful, because then it might become public, the fact that these lands used to belong to other people and they might want their land back, the Palestinian refugees who were robbed by the JNF. So that is something that shows how the JNF has been pulled apart by different elite groups. And I think right now the JNF has really become very hollow, in a sense that it's used as a way to raise money, for example, in the UK, to bring in support from the international Jewish groups mainly, to help fund the further colonization and expropriation of land in Palestine. But it no longer takes the initiative and has its own agency about how to do that. Now, there was this very interesting question about whether the military is independent and whether the military is an economic force in itself, like it is in Egypt, in a growing way, I think, because Al-Sisi, the president, is from the military and has brought the military to the front of the Egyptian political system to chase away the Muslim Brotherhood. But in Turkey, it's something else. In Turkey, we have a president who is certainly a populist and certainly aggressive and promotes aggressive military action in Syria, in Libya, and elsewhere. But at the same time, he has canceled the draft, the conscription. And he is eliminated from office. Many senior generals accused of taking part in the coup, the failed coup of July 2016. So what is happening in Turkey is perhaps more similar to what's happening in Israel, in which you have a political system, a political elite, which is populist and right-wing, and saying to the military, we are still going to use force as part of our politics, but we don't need your advice anymore. We don't care about the experts. We know better than you do how to do that. And that is why also they prefer SIGINT to HUMINT. Because when the Israeli intelligence officers say, we have analyzed the Palestinian movement, and we think, for example, that confronting them in Al-Aqsa, in the mosque, would be a bad idea. It will only galvanize them more and create a stronger resistance movement, the Israeli government said, we don't care about that advice. That's not your job to give us analysis. We just want surveillance data and weapons and power. And finally, the question about the cracks in the Israeli image as a high-tech success story. First of all, I think the fact that the Israeli government used high-tech as a defense against BDS really shows how weak their argument was. You know, when Stephen Hawking supported BDS, and the response of the Israeli government was, but the chip in his wheelchair was actually, which is actually wrong. You know, it was not an Israeli invention. It was produced by the company Intel, which has a factory in Israel, but that doesn't make it an Israeli invention. And then they deleted that message because they realized that it backfires. It only makes them seem much worse in that light. So that shows actually to the BDS that we have a point that we can push stronger. And just look what happened with AnyVision. AnyVision, an Israeli company that develops facial recognition technology that was first used and tested in the occupied West Bank. Then Microsoft wanted to buy that technology and to buy AnyVision. And Greg, just like what you said before about how the Israelis use a different language, and for them it doesn't sound like war crimes, it just sounds like the right thing to do. The CEO of AnyVision gave an interview in Hebrew to the Israeli press and said, you know, there are some legal issues, there are some human rights issues, we're aware of that, but this is, you know, we didn't start the occupation, it's already there. We're just developing a technology, and the Israeli military is our customer. But that interview was translated into English, and activists around the world used that to put pressure on Microsoft and said, do you want to sell us technology that has been tested on human beings against their wish? Are you complicit in these war crimes? Microsoft decided to drop AnyVision. They canceled their plans to buy that company. This is a major success for the BDS movement, and it shows exactly how a successful research, dissemination of information can get results.
Isn't that a great punchline? Research and dissemination can get results. I think that's a lesson to all of us outside, and I cannot thank you too much for all of your answers so far. I think I will probably round up now, and unless there's any final comments that anybody wants to make. And I'll just take in passing the last little bit in the chat box and the Q&A. Robin from London has actually emphasized something that you were saying, Shir, about how the Black Lives Matter movement has exposed the militarization of the US police forces, the interchanges and parallels with Israeli militarized security forces, and that's harming the reputation of Israel, selling its high-tech security methods to many people around the world, certainly to liberal Zionism, or so-called. And there was a question that came in right at the start, and I think it's probably as much aimed at me, and I may have answered it in part, about how you get the whole issue of the JNF and the ethnic cleansing of the Bedouin discussed in Parliament. And we have, as people know on this Zoom, been helping the campaign to stop the eviction of the Sumarine family in East Jerusalem, been involved in supporting all the campaigns to stop demolitions across the Naqab desert. But in particular, we're pleased that a number of parliamentarians have signed up to the early day motion in the Westminster Parliament to explicitly stop ethnic cleansing, stop evictions, and stop the JNF. And I have to say, I hope within relatively supportive company here this afternoon, we were surprised that we would get that degree of support from MPs for an early day motion in the current climate, a climate that's seen the IHRA rolled out across all of Europe, not just England, but where any kind of BDS activity is regarded as anti-Semitic. And yet we have got 70 odd MPs who have been prepared to sign up to that EDM. So if you're in a UK constituency that the MP hasn't yet signed up, feel free to put pressure on. Look up Submarine EDM, you'll get the early day motion, and it's a way of hopefully getting something discussed in the Parliament. I have also put into the chat box, I think I'd like to say thank you to Norma as well, who's been putting in updates as we've gone along, hopefully referencing the speakers and what they've been speaking about. But I've been putting in some of the details about legal challenges, and if anybody wants to know more, my own email is in there. And I know 1 or 2 people have suggested resources that would assist in the research that Greg's been doing, and I have asked you, if you want to get in touch, just drop us an email. That would be really helpful. But finally, I'd just like to thank everybody who's joined us this afternoon. I know people may have been deterred by good weather outside, not in Manchester. They may have been deterred by the freedom to move and go out and meet friends and family, not in Manchester. They might even have been deterred by some football, which I know nothing about whatsoever, and certainly not in Manchester. But thank you to Scottish PSC for hosting us this afternoon. Thank you, Jimmy, personally, for being an unseen figure behind the scenes. Thank you, Greg, for your excellent work and ongoing work in research. And Shir, it's just such a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for all that you have said and contributed today. And to everyone who's been watching, and all these nice comments I can't keep up with from people across the world, Canada, even other parts of the UK, places I can't recognise. Thank you so much for your comments. Do please watch the previous Stop the JNF webinars and tune in again a month from today for the next Stop the JNF webinar. All the details on the website, and hopefully we've provided some information for you this afternoon. Thanks again all, and bye. That's Zoom language for bye.
Bye.